Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Mike and Mike just returned from the Dreamforce conference in San Francisco. So we wanted to do a special episode just to focus on their experience at Dreamforce. So Mike and Mike, first tell me, how was it?
It lived up to the hype again. It was my second Dreamforce that I've been to. And for those of you that don't know what Dreamforce is, it's the annual conference held in San Francisco. It's thrown by Salesforce.com. So what you have essentially are 170,000 fans of Salesforce, customers of Salesforce, converging in the city of San Francisco all at one time. And they essentially take over Moscone Center and about 6 of the surrounding hotels. And it's nothing but learning for a solid week.
And you see a combination of both sales leadership, sales enablement leadership, marketing professionals, consultants who implement Salesforce, developers who are either high level, very experienced developers, to those who are just getting into developing inside the technology. It's also a place where Salesforce exhibits and displays recent acquisitions, whether those are acquisitions on the technology side or acquisitions on the services side.
Yeah, it's a good mix of really anybody that's involved with Salesforce or that uses Salesforce from any perspective. I think there's a place there where you can learn, where you can network with people that are solving similar problems. And they do a really nice job of organizing it in a way where you can follow your tracks and really meet with the right people to advance your knowledge and the platform capabilities, what's coming on the horizon, all those things. They really do a nice job.
Now, you two went together. You come back. If there's someone on your team that says, okay, I missed Dreamforce, what's the one thing I should know about what you learned while you were there?
So usually Dreamforce has a theme, and this year's theme was really centered around artificial intelligence, machine learning, the capabilities that they're developing with their Einstein platform, partners and companies that are really investing heavily in this smart technology and things like that. And so that's really one of the things that we spent a lot of time in that area, talking to those companies, talking to those thought leaders, and really understanding what's going to be on the horizon.
Yeah, so when they talk about Einstein, they really presented it as this layer within their application that takes all of the data that's available inside a Salesforce instance. So customer data, organization data, data from sources that you're pulling from outside of your organization, and using it, analyzing that data to come up with meaningful insights about the organizations that you're working with. So your customer base, all with the purpose of increasing efficiency and effectiveness from a sales perspective, a marketing perspective, a service perspective, a relationship with your customer perspective. I think the takeaway that's really important is staying ahead of emerging trends in technology that apply to your business and not thinking that, hey, just because this is a technology thing, I shouldn't worry about it because there's a CTO in the organization who's worried about it, or there's somebody who does a lot of work with ones and zeros who should be working on it, or sitting in, we talked with somebody earlier this morning who referred to a team of people who are in a basement drinking a lot of energy drinks, tapping away on a computer, building websites. You think about how this technology can apply to the roles that you're in today and become part of that tool set that you have when you're working with your customer base.
So I think one of my key takeaways, and there were 2. One is that we've been hearing for months now that sales organizations, sales leaders, sales reps are facing the challenges of technology stack overload, for lack of a better term. We've thrown a lot of technology at a lot of different problems in sales. And when you talk to the typical sales rep today, they might have 8 to 12 different tools that they log into and that they use every day. Some get used, some don't get used, but all of them were really introduced to solve a specific problem and really hopefully enable a sales rep to be more efficient and do a better job in making contact, talking to the right people, and then obviously identifying opportunity and managing process very efficiently. And what we've seen with all of these tools coming into the market is that people in some cases are really overloaded. And that gives challenge to the sales leader that says, well, I invest in all these tools, some of them are being used, some of them aren't. Which ones do I keep? Which ones do I get rid of? How do they work together to make a sales rep more efficient? Or are they really creating more noise than they're adding in value? And so one of the things I really started to see with a lot of platforms, the AI thinking and so forth, is that some of these things are converging now, where instead of looking at individual tools and what their capability is as a standalone thing, now we're looking at the workflow and we're saying, what does a sales rep's workflow look like? And how can some of these things, work together to make the sort of the promise of efficiency a reality? And so I was starting to see some things that you can think about individual tools that we use today where they are starting to converge a little bit. And I think that's going to be helpful because today, when you talk to anybody in a sales leadership role about adding yet another tool to the mix, it's really a struggle.
And I think that focus on workflow is really important. And each individual has their own workflow. And that's where APIs and browser extensions and some of the more technical solutions that are out there can really help you. And I think that was another thing that was really interesting about how Salesforce presented this Einstein layer and some of the other acquisitions that they've made, whether you're talking about a capability like Pardot, or you're talking about Salesforce Cloud, or you're talking about some of these other general capabilities, having them integrated inside a platform so that it compels the sales rep to stay in the platform, capture information, and use the information that's available to help be more effective in their job role. I think anytime, and we spend a lot of time in Gmail because we've got our Catalyst sale email is powered by Gmail. We spend a lot of time in Gmail. We spend a lot of time in Google Docs. When you can have an extension that is integrated into Gmail and it can capture the communication that you're having with the client and automatically load that into Salesforce instance without, or any other CRM, and this works across other CRMs, but it can integrate into the workflow and not require that a sales rep is copying or pasting, or require that a sales rep is emailing directly out of the system. I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about with this technology is it allows you to not have to change your workflow, yet still leverage the tools that are available.
You two always talk about how sales is a thinking process. So when you bring in these new items into your toolbox, how do you determine whether or not this helps with the thinking process, or it's just something that's going to add a layer, get in the way? How do you view that?
It's a great question, Jody. And from my perspective, is it going to slow things down? Is it going to accelerate my ability to get information? If it's either going to slow things down, become just another barrier that gets in the way of me doing my job, then it's a tool for the sake of having a tool, which is not very exciting. If it is going to make it easier for me to get information about my customer, if it's going to increase some of the metrics that I look at, and those metrics could either be response rates that I'm getting to email, response rates that I'm getting to phone calls, questions that I'm seeing from my customer base based on insights that I'm sharing with them. If it's something that allows me to do more of that, I'm going to integrate it in. And I could really boil it down to when we test it with members of our sales team, do they say they want to use it or do they ignore it? Do you get a bump in the first couple of days and then it drops off? And we had an example here recently where we shared a tool with a member of our team. And within a couple of days, after the freemium version of it wasn't giving him all the information that he needed, he went and subscribed to the tool on his own dime and then started asking us when we were going to be able to support that inside the organization. And that's actually, it's a client of ours. Crystal Knows is one of the organizations we work with. And they are that tool that you describe where the impact is immediate from a sales perspective, provides valuable insights on individuals that you're working with, whether they're existing customers or future customers, integrated into products like Gmail, products like Salesforce.
I think another way I look at it to answer that question, Jody, is are you working for the tool or is the tool working for you? And that's something you can assess pretty quickly based on a trial or based on usage and seeing how it works in the overall workflow. And a lot of the tools that are out there require the sales rep to do a lot of heavy lifting or a lot of work where they're having to take data that's in one place or in one tool, import it into the other tool, and then they can then make that platform be effective. And what's encouraging for me is to see how a lot of the AI and the machine learning concepts that are being really invested in right now involve areas of eliminating that need to do the manual heavy lifting. In other words, if you know what the journey should be for a prospect to receive communication from you, you shouldn't have to map out that journey for every single customer, but the application you're working with should know that, should have the content and being able to support you. So if I find that the ratio of having to support the tool is exceeding how much value I'm getting out of it, to Mike's point, that's when you start to see people in your sales organization just don't use the tools. And the tools that do deliver, they have a pretty simple metric. Does it help me sell or not? And does it help me become more effective or not? And a sales rep will let you know very quickly if that is the case. Back to your point about the thinking process, the other thing that I was really happy to hear and see, and this is not just from products we looked at, but from sales and thought leaders that we were able to network with while we were there, is that the idea that artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's really not going to replace the last mile, is what Mike and I are calling it, which is that thinking process where two people are still working with each other to solve a problem. The tools that we saw and the things that people are investing in are really designed to put you in the right place at the right time with the right people so that it's best use of everyone's time. And if that's the basic tenet, then that frees up a lot of the time that sales reps spend sifting through data, sifting through information to try and get in front of the right people. Now we should be able to see technology actually helping us maximize our time. And that's really what it's about. And it's not just our time as sales reps, but it's also maximizing the time of any buyer that's out there. And what I'm seeing is that the thinking process in itself and the last mile, and when we say last mile, what we mean is all the technology in the world can get you in front of the right people and have you having the right conversations at the right time, but that conversation still takes place. A person talking to another person still has to figure out how to communicate with each other effectively, solve problems, have enough business acumen and skill to understand problems that are discussed. All those things still matter. And so no matter how much money we throw at technology to make the job easier, it's still going to come down to that person-to-person communication.
It's so important. And you think about how much time is spent in a sales role doing research, gathering information, trying to make contact with the right people. And one of the things that I'm really excited about when it comes to some of the AI capabilities that were discussed, and you got to be careful about what's real and what's not, what is presentation magic and what actually works today. But it's this idea of being able to meet the customer at the right point in time so that while they're trading their time and energy with us, we're also trading good information with them and helping them solve that problem that they're running into or that challenge that they're running into. And in the past, this would all been about going through a Rolodex, reading stuff in a newspaper, picking up a phone, sharing some information, going to some networking event. And now there's so much information that's available to you that you can use, and these tools will help you do that at scale. And that to me is one of the more exciting things that's coming up with this technology.
Yeah, it's never been easier to be in sales. That might sound odd to people, but when I think about what we used to have to go through just to get to the right person at the right time, for those of us that have been at this for a while, when I look at the amount of information that we have out there, it's never been easier to connect with the right people. It's never been as difficult as it is to make meaningful contact and get engagement. So getting to the door is one thing, but being in a position now where you're fighting for attention across, this person's dealing with a lot of different people that are also gaining that access very quickly. It's separating yourself from the crowd. And that's where the thinking process still will differentiate you from everybody else that has these tools. Because let's face it, anybody can plug this technology in, anybody can figure out who they should be talking to. But the people that have the meaningful conversations are the ones that will ultimately prevail.
Yeah, so what do you understand about your customer's buying process? So a lot of times we talk about our sales process and we talk about the processes that sales organizations adapt and adopt in order to be effective. You know, and this was another theme at the event. It's learning more about your customer's process and going where they are. It's not all about you. You may have a great product. You may have a great solution. You may be able to solve all the problems that an organization's running into. But if you don't understand their process and you don't factor that into the discussion, you're just like every other sales rep that is trying to get their time and attention.
Well, this conversation is why I'm so delighted with Mike and Catalyst Sale, because it's such a great blend of what's coming up and how things are now, combined with all the experience that you guys have. It's what makes it delightful for me. But I think I have a great question to end on here, because I hear you guys say there's 170,000 people in town for this conference for Dreamforce. And just hearing that overwhelms me. I live in a town of 9,000 people, and that is just 170,000. That's too much. How do you handle that? If I'm going to go to Salesforce, what tips do you have for me to just not get overwhelmed, to make sure I get the most out of the conference?
If you're thinking about going to Dreamforce next year, obviously when you have 170,000 people converging on San Francisco, things like hotel rooms, flights, all of those things, they fill up early. I know that the event sells out every year. We were fortunate in that we were able to get full access pass somewhat at the last minute, but I wouldn't rely on that. I would definitely plan early. And so that's just from the logistics standpoint. From the event perspective, though, that in itself can be really challenging because there is so much going on at the event. There's absolutely no way you can see everything. In fact, you'll barely scratch the surface while you're there. And I think one of the things they do a really nice job with is preparing you with the information about who's going to be there, who's going to be presenting, what tracks you want to be part of. They've done a really nice job of sort of segmenting tracks out that address the needs of different groups that are interested in Salesforce. And whether you're a developer or if you're a sales professional or whatever your role is inside of a company, you can find those tracks. And they do a pretty good job of keeping those groups of common interests in the same areas. And so, for example, they book all of Moscone Center plus a half a dozen of the hotels. So you're finding you're having to walk up and down the streets to get to different meetings. They've done a good job of trying to consolidate that so you don't have to do as much foot travel between sessions and things like that. But, getting ahead of the agenda, figuring out where you want to really spend the time. For me personally, we spent time trying to get into some of the keynotes and some of the high profile events. We skipped out on the Tony Robbins thing. I heard it was going to be a little eccentric. And after I saw the video afterwards of everybody jumping up and down like they were at a Britney Spears concert, I decided, okay, that's probably a good thing that I skipped that. But they broadcast those and they also record those. And you can watch those when you have time. For example, when we went to the keynote, one of the keynotes with Mark Bennett, basically we got there 45 minutes early and we still couldn't get in because it was already at capacity. And so we essentially tied up a couple of hours of just trying to go to this keynote and everything. And what I found was that when we couldn't get into the keynotes, that was the best time to actually meet with people inside of some of the meeting areas. And so in the Einstein area, if we wanted to talk to subject matter experts or if we wanted to go into Trailhead and talk to developers, everybody's in those keynotes. And that's where you can really have quality conversations. And so I think next year what we'll do is we'll look at the keynotes and say, okay, it's great that we could go see an inspirational keynote. We can watch that in a recording afterwards, but really take the advantage of the downtime when everybody else is in keynotes to talk to a lot of the subject matter experts that are still throughout the event and really get more quality time with those people.
I think of the old quote of proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And this is another event where you have to plan. I made the mistake of looking at the agenda the weekend before. We're busy. We've got a lot of stuff going on. So from a priority standpoint, that planning wasn't the priority. But knowing what I know now, after this being the first Dreamforce that I've attended, there will be a plan in place for next year. We're already thinking about it. We know when we should be looking at hotels. We know where we want to stay.
For what it's worth, not Walnut Creek, because that's where we ended up this year. And I love Walnut Creek, but when you have to ride the BART for an hour in each direction, standing room only, maybe not the best option.
I think Mike's still bitter because he broke his, I don't even know if I'd call that a carry-on bag.
No, but it was a hard-sided suitcase that I bought for my wife for Jamaica. It was beautiful. It was actually Salesforce teal blue, so it was pretty cool. But the handle broke on it, and I learned a valuable lesson there is that carting a suitcase around San Francisco with a broken handle. So I would buy durable luggage. That would be my second tip.
Well, those are great tips because my goodness, so many people. It almost sounds like planning a trip to Disney World.
Yeah.
And you say that. I mean, the crowds were like Disney World on a peak day. I mean,
if you're into Salesforce, it's the happiest place on earth.
Sure. It was the happiest place on earth. You're shoulder to shoulder with people moving everywhere. It felt like a freaking cow in some instances. But just one last piece. look at the presenters who are out there presenting. You know that it's difficult to talk to those folks right after they do the keynote and right after they do their session, but you know they're in town. Sending them a note in advance, letting them know that you're going to be in town at the same time, that you'd like to buy them coffee. It just becomes a great opportunity to engage with those folks. Many of those presenters are presenting because they're working to get their brand out there, whether it's their personal brand or the company they work for. So if you plan in advance, you can get access to some really neat people. It's just really hard to try to do that when you're at the event.
All right, good. Thanks for those tips. This is a great time to talk about it since you were still there and it's so fresh, and now we can start planning ahead for next year if we know where we want to go. If you want to find out more about what we're up to, you can find us at catalystsale.com. Thank you, Mike and Mike, for all of your insight on Dreamforce, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.